Rum built empires. Rum funded rebellion. Rum was traded for human lives. But almost no one talks about that. It's sold as celebration, marketed with pirates and palm trees, poured in crystal glasses. But its rise is tied to plantations, naval dominance, and one of the largest forced migrations in human history. Before oil-powered empires, rum did. Before global corporations controlled trade, barrels of alcohol did. This wasn't just a drink, it was currency. It was infrastructure, it was control, and it helped shape the modern world. This is the story of rum. In medieval Europe, sugar was rare. It was a luxury reserved for royalty and the wealthy elite, a symbol of refinement, a taste of the exotic. But in the 17th century, European powers seized islands across the Caribbean, and everything changed. Places like Barbados were transformed into vast sugar factories. Entire landscapes were stripped, replanted, engineered for one purpose: cane. Sugar demanded scale. Scale demanded labor. The indigenous populations of many islands had already been devastated by disease and conquest. So plantation owners turned west to Africa. The demand for labor exploded. On these plantations, sugar was crushed, boiled, refined under brutal heat. And from the thick, dark byproduct, molasses, came something new: rum. It was cheap to produce, high in alcohol, easy to transport, profitable. Barbados became the laboratory. By the mid-1600s, it was almost entirely converted to sugar production. Small farms disappeared, land consolidated, plantations grew larger, and enslaved Africans quickly outnumbered European settlers. By 1680, roughly 70% of the island's population was enslaved. The island was small, but its output was enormous. Barbados became one of the richest colonies in the English Empire. Its wealth reshaped Britain's merchant class. Sugar profits flowed into shipbuilding, into insurance, into banking houses in London. The plantation system refined there would later be exported to Jamaica and beyond. What was perfected in Barbados became a blueprint: efficiency, scale, control. And rum was part of that output, not an accident, not a novelty. An integrated component of a production system designed to extract maximum value from land and labor. Barbados was not paradise, it was infrastructure. What began as a byproduct would become the bloodstream of the Atlantic world. A system emerged, structured, calculated, efficient. Europe sent manufactured goods to the coasts of West Africa: textiles, firearms, metal tools, and increasingly, rum. Rum was traded along the African coast, often directly for human beings. Men, women, and children were forced onto ships designed for cargo, not comfort. Packed tightly below deck, chained, numbered. The Middle Passage killed an estimated 1 in 5. Those who survived arrived in the Americas. Not as citizens, not as workers, but as property. They were forced into the sugar fields. They cut cane beneath relentless sun. They fed boiling mills. They endured a system built entirely on extraction. Sugar produced molasses. Molasses produced rum. Rum financed more voyages. More voyages demanded more captives. This was not chaos. It was an economic machine, a triangular network stretching across the Atlantic: Europe to Africa, Africa to the Americas back to Europe. Across the Atlantic world, rum was not marginal. By the early 1700s, New England alone was producing millions of gallons annually. Caribbean islands were some of the wealthiest territories on Earth, per square mile. Barbados at one point generated more wealth for Britain than all the North American colonies combined. Sugar profits built estates in London. They funded banks. Insurance companies were created to underwrite slave ships. Entire financial instruments evolved to manage the risk of transporting human cargo. This was not a side economy, it was central to early global capitalism. In 1781, a British slave ship called the Zong ran low on water. The crew made a decision. They threw more than 100 enslaved Africans overboard, not in chaos, but for insurance, because insurers would compensate lost cargo if it died at sea, but not if it died of illness. The massacre was later argued in court as a property dispute, not a murder trial. The system had become so normalized that human lives were reduced to accounting entries. Rum shipments were insured, ships were insured, human beings were insured. This was the logic of the Atlantic economy. Profit flowed in one direction, human suffering flowed in another. Rum connected it all. But rum did more than fuel plantations. It fueled empire at sea. For more than 2 centuries, sailors in the British Royal Navy received a daily ration of rum. It masked spoiled water. It delivered calories. It lifted morale during months at sea. In 1740, Admiral Edward Vernon ordered the ration diluted with water. The mixture became known as grog, measured, regulated, controlled. The ration was not generosity, it was policy. Sailors who refused could be punished. Drunkenness was flogged. Sobriety was enforced through structure. Rum was measured, diluted, timed. The state controlled intoxication, and through that control, it controlled morale. At sea for months, cut off from home, surrounded by death and disease. The daily ration became ritual. Empire was not only enforced through cannon fire, it was maintained through routine. Britain's navy would become the dominant maritime force in the world. Its ships carried spices, textiles, weapons, enslaved people, and rum. Naval power projected imperial authority across continents. Empire required discipline. Rum became part of that discipline. A ration could reward, or it could be withheld. Even at sea, alcohol was a tool of control. By the early 18th century, rum consumption in the American colonies was staggering. It was cheaper than beer, safer than water, common in taverns and homes alike. Rum distilleries multiplied throughout New England. The colonial economy became deeply entangled with molasses imports from the Caribbean. Then Britain imposed the Molasses Act of 1733, a tax designed to protect British sugar interests. To colonial merchants, it felt like economic suffocation. Smuggling networks expanded almost overnight. Ships unloaded barrels in hidden coves. Merchants bribed customs officials. Taverns became meeting grounds for dissent. Rum was poured as arguments were made about rights and representation. The American Revolution was not caused by rum, but rum was present. It funded trade, it moved through ports, it lubricated conversation and resistance. The same empire that used rum to sustain its navy now faced rebellion partly financed by the rum trade itself. History has a sense of irony. Today, rum is marketed with palm trees and pirates, aged in oak barrels, served over ice, mixed into celebration. But the wealth generated during the sugar era did not remain where the cane was cut. It flowed outward, to London, to European capitals, to financial institutions that would shape the modern world. Many Caribbean nations were left with economies structured around monoculture exports long after slavery ended. The scars of that system did not disappear with abolition. They linger in trade imbalances, in economic dependency, in historical memory. When slavery was abolished in the British Empire in 1833, plantation owners were compensated. The formerly enslaved were not. The British government borrowed enormous sums to pay slave owners for the loss of property. That debt was so large that British taxpayers only finished paying it off in 2015. The financial legacy of sugar and rum extended well into the modern era. Meanwhile, many Caribbean nations were left with economies designed around export dependency. The structure of extraction remained, only the branding changed. Rum survived empires. It survived abolition. It survived the ships that carried it across violent seas. But its rise tells the story of how global power was once measured, not in oil, not in technology, but in sugar. Whiskey helped ignite rebellion in Scotland and America. Rum financed empire across oceans, but in colder lands to the north, another spirit was rising, not from plantations, not from tropical cane, but from grain, from state control, from a different model of power entirely. Next, we travel to Russia, to vodka.